Winter at minus 71 degrees without power in Appalachia. A 93-year-old man survives alone in the mountains. This is not a movie. This is not fiction. This is what happened to Elmer Boggs in the second week of January, on a ridge in Harlan County, Kentucky, when the cold came down from the north like something alive and tried to take everything he had. Winter at minus 71 degrees, without power. A 93-year-old man, alone, in the mountains. No one was coming to help him, and what he did next is something you will never forget. Elmer Boggs had not left Harlan County in 93 years. He was born on the same ridge where he still slept, in the same timber frame house his grandfather had raised with oak beams cut from the hillside above Clover Fork. The house leaned to the east now, the way old men lean when they have carried too much for too long. The porch boards had been replaced 4 times in his lifetime, the chimney repointed twice, and the tin roof patched so many times it looked like a quilt made of metal. But the house stood. And so did Elmer. He was a tall man once. Age had taken 3 inches from him, bent his spine into a gentle curve, thinned his arms until the veins stood out like cords of rope beneath paper skin. His knuckles were swollen, the joints thick with decades of labor, and when he made a fist, the bones cracked like dry wood. But his hands were still large, still strong from a lifetime gripping axes and shovels and the steering wheels of trucks that fought their way up mountain roads in every kind of weather. His eyes were blue, sharp and clear, the kind of blue that made people look twice because it seemed too vivid for a face that old. And his mind was the sharpest thing about him. It moved quickly, cataloging and calculating the way it had always done, the way it had kept him alive in the mines and on the mountain and through every winter that had tried to break him. It was the second week of January when the sky turned the color of iron. Elmer noticed it first in the behavior of the birds. The cardinals disappeared from the holly bush near the front steps. The crows, usually bold enough to land on the porch railing and stare at him through the window, were gone. Even the wind had changed its voice. It no longer whistled through the gaps in the siding. It moaned, low and constant, like a living thing pressing its mouth against the walls. Elmer sat in his chair by the wood stove, his hands wrapped around a ceramic mug that had long since lost its handle. He drank chicory coffee because real coffee had become too expensive, and he stirred it with the same bent spoon he had used for 40 years. The radio on the shelf crackled with static. He had been trying to catch the weather report from the station out of Lexington, but the signal had been fading all morning. He caught fragments, polar vortex, historic, potentially life-threatening. And then the words that made him set his mug down on the arm of the chair and stare at the radio as if it had spoken to him personally. Minus 71 degrees. Wind chill factor across the central Appalachian ridge. He had survived cold before. He remembered the winter of 1977, when the pipes froze and the creek behind the house turned into a sheet of glass, and he had to melt snow in a pot on the stove just to have drinking water. He remembered 1994, when the power went out for 11 days and he and his wife, Loretta, had slept in the kitchen with the oven door open, wrapped in every blanket they owned. Loretta had laughed about it later, said it was the closest they had been since their honeymoon. But Loretta was gone now. She had been gone for 14 years, and the kitchen felt bigger without her. The silence she left was not the absence of sound. It was the absence of meaning. Every room still held her shape. The dent in her side of the mattress. The hook by the door where she hung her apron. The windowsill above the sink where she kept a glass jar of dried wildflowers that she replaced every spring. Elmer had not removed any of it. He never would. He stood and walked to the window. The glass was already frosting on the inside. Outside, the mountains looked like they had been drained of color. The bare trees stood in rows like the bones of some enormous creature half buried in the earth. The sky pressed down on everything, heavy and gray and close, as if it were lowering itself onto the ridgeline like a lid being placed on a pot. There was no movement anywhere, no cars on the road below, no smoke from other chimneys. The world looked empty. The world looked like it had forgotten he existed. The power went out at 3:17 in the afternoon. There was no dramatic flicker, no warning surge. The hum of the refrigerator simply stopped. The small light over the kitchen sink went dark, and the digital clock on the microwave blinked once and died. The silence that followed was absolute. Elmer stood in the middle of the kitchen and listened. He could hear the house itself, the creaking of beams, the soft ticking of wood contracting in the cold, and underneath it all, the wind. Always the wind. He was alone, completely alone. And no one was coming. He moved quickly, with the deliberate efficiency of a man who understood that hesitation in weather like this could cost a life. He closed the doors to every room except the kitchen and the sitting room where the wood stove stood. He stuffed rags into the gaps under each door. He pulled the heavy curtains across the windows, curtains Loretta had sewn from old wool blankets 30 years ago, and secured them with clothespins at the edges to block every draft. He checked the wood stove. There was still a bed of coals glowing orange under the ash. He added 3 split logs from the stack beside the door and adjusted the damper until the fire caught and began to breathe. The woodpile was his first real concern. He had split wood in October, as he did every year, and stacked it under a corrugated metal lean-to on the south side of the house. Enough for 2 weeks of normal burning. But this was not going to be normal burning. If the temperature dropped as low as the radio warned, he would need that stove going around the clock, feeding it every 2 to 3 hours, and 2 weeks of wood would become 1. Maybe less. And there was no one to bring him more. No one to check on him. No one who would notice if the smoke stopped rising from his chimney. He pulled on his coat, a canvas Carhartt jacket so old the lining had separated from the shell, and zipped it to his chin. He put on 2 pairs of gloves, wrapped a scarf around his face, pulled a knit cap over his ears. Then he opened the back door and stepped outside. The cold hit him like a wall. Not a breeze or a chill or even a blast. A solid, physical thing. It pressed against his chest and made his lungs seize. His eyes watered instantly and the tears froze on his lashes before they could fall. The air had a taste to it, metallic and sharp, like biting down on aluminum foil. He could feel it in his teeth, in his sinuses, in the thin skin of his nostrils. Each breath burned going in and came out as a thick cloud of vapor that the wind tore away instantly. He made 3 trips from the woodpile to the back door, carrying as many logs as his arms could hold each time. His fingers were numb by the second trip. By the third, his knees were shaking and he had to stop twice to catch his breath, leaning against the side of the house with his eyes closed, willing his heart to slow down. He was 93 years old. His body was a machine that had been running for almost a century, and some parts no longer worked the way they once did. But his mind was clear. It was working now, calculating, planning, thinking 3 steps ahead the way his father had taught him when they used to hunt these mountains together, just the 2 of them, alone against the wilderness. Back inside, he counted. 16 logs beside the wood stove. Enough for maybe 2 days if he was careful. He opened the pantry. 3 cans of pinto beans, 2 cans of tomato soup, a jar of peanut butter, half full, a bag of cornmeal, a dozen eggs, saltine crackers, a bottle of hot sauce, 1-gallon jug of water. The well pump was electric and would not work. The creek would be frozen solid. He would need to ration everything, every bite, every sip, every log. He was alone. His nearest neighbor lived miles away down roads that would be impassable with ice. The gas station at the bottom of the hollow was 3 miles of winding switchbacks, and even if he could walk it, which he could not, it would be closed. The phone line was dead. His old flip phone showed no signal. He was not surprised. Cell service on the mountain had always been unreliable, and in a storm like this, the towers would be overwhelmed or damaged or frozen solid. He sat back down in his chair. The fire crackled. The house groaned. Outside, the temperature continued to fall. Elmer Boggs was alone on a mountain in Appalachia, 93 years old, with no power, no phone, no help coming, and a cold descending that most people in this country could not even imagine. He would live or die by his own hands. There was no other option. He closed his eyes and took a slow breath. Then he opened them and looked at the fire. He was not afraid. He had never been afraid of the mountains. The mountains were in his blood, in his bones, in the way he breathed and the way he moved through the world. He had been born here. He had buried his wife here. And if it came to it, he would die here. But not today. Not without a fight. Not while there was still wood to burn and breath in his lungs, and the memory of Loretta telling him every single day of their marriage that he was the most stubborn man she had ever known. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel. Every week, we bring you true stories of human resilience that will change the way you see the world. If you do not want to miss a single one, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on the bell. It takes 1 second and it means you will never miss the moment that reminds you what humans are truly capable of. The first night was the longest. Elmer had experienced long nights before, nights when Loretta was sick, and he sat beside her bed counting her breaths, nights when the mine collapsed in 62, and he waited in the dark for 17 hours before the rescue team broke through. But this night had a different quality. This night was a negotiation between his body and the cold was a patient negotiator. It did not rush. It did not make mistakes. It simply waited, pressing against every wall, seeping through every crack, taking 1 degree at a time. By 8 o'clock, the temperature inside the sealed rooms had dropped to 45 degrees. The sitting room held at around 60, but only within a radius of about 6 feet from the stove. Beyond that, the air was sharp and hostile. He could feel it on the back of his neck, on his ankles, on any inch of exposed skin. The cold was hunting for weakness. The cold was patient. He dragged the old recliner closer to the stove and piled it with blankets. He put on a second pair of socks, wrapped his feet in a towel and tucked them under a wool blanket. He wore his coat, his hat, and his gloves. He looked, he imagined, like a man preparing for an expedition to the Arctic, rather than sitting in his own living room. But the living room had become hostile territory. The living room was trying to kill him. The wood stove was a Vermont Castings Defiant he had bought in 1984. Cast iron, heavy as a promise, built to last longer than the men who made it. It held heat the way a stone holds warmth from the sun, but cast iron could only do so much against minus 71 degrees. The logs burned faster than they should have, the fire consuming the wood with a hungry, desperate intensity, as if the flames themselves understood that they were fighting for survival. At 10 o'clock, he heard the first crack, sharp and sudden from outside like a rifle shot. He startled in his chair, his hand going instinctively to the armrest. Then he understood. A tree. The cold was splitting the trees. When the temperature drops far enough, the sap inside the wood freezes and expands, and the trunk cracks open like a bone breaking. He had heard it before, years ago, but never this loud, never this close, never this constant. Over the next hour, he counted 11 cracks. Each one made the house shudder. Each one sounded closer than the last. The forest was dying around him. The forest was screaming. He tried to sleep, but could not. The cold kept him alert, reminding him with every breath that it was there, waiting for him to make a mistake. He dozed in fragments, 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there, always waking to check the fire. At 2 a.m, the stove had burned down to coals, and the temperature in the room had dropped noticeably. He could feel it on his face, a tightness in the skin, a numbness at the tip of his nose. He got up and added 2 more logs, adjusted them carefully on the coals, and waited until the bark caught and the flames rose before sitting back down. The fire was his only ally. The fire was all he had. It was during one of these wakeful stretches, somewhere around 3 a.m, that he heard something else. Not a tree cracking, not the wind. A scratching sound coming from the back door, soft and persistent, like fingernails on wood. He sat still and listened. The sound came again, accompanied by a low, thin whine. An animal. He crouched at the door, knees protesting with sharp pain, and pressed his ear to the wood. The whining was louder now, desperate and trembling. Something was out there. Something was alive. He straightened up and pulled the door open. The dog was small, some kind of hound mix, brown and white with long ears and ribs showing through its thin coat like the bars of a cage. It stood on the back step shaking violently, its eyes wide and glassy with fear and cold. Ice had formed on its whiskers and around its nose. Its paws were raw and pink, the pads cracked and bleeding from the frozen ground. It looked up at Elmer and made a sound that was not quite a bark and not quite a cry. Something in between. Something that sounded like a question. Something that sounded like please. Elmer did not hesitate. He reached down and scooped the dog into his arms. It weighed maybe 20 pounds, nothing but bones and fur and the desperate will to survive. It was shaking so hard he could feel its ribs vibrating against his chest. He carried it inside, kicked the door shut behind him, and set it down on the floor near the wood stove. The dog collapsed immediately, curling into a tight ball, its nose tucked under its tail. Elmer knelt beside it, ignoring the pain in his knees, and ran his hand along its side. The fur was stiff with frost. The skin underneath was cold, dangerously cold. He grabbed a blanket from the chair and wrapped it around the dog, then sat beside it on the floor with his back against the chair, holding it against his body, sharing what little warmth he had. He talked to it. He did not know why exactly, except that the silence had been pressing in on him for hours, and the sound of his own voice was a comfort. He told the dog about Loretta, about how she had always wanted a dog, but he had said no because he was too practical for pets, and now he wished he had said yes, just once, to see her face light up the way it did when she was happy. He told it about the house, about how his grandfather built it with an axe and a saw and his bare hands, working alone for 2 years, cutting every beam, laying every stone, refusing help from anyone because that was what the men in his family did. He told it about the mountains, about how they were the oldest mountains in the world, older than bones, older than memory, and how they had a way of holding on to the people who loved them, keeping them close, keeping them rooted, even when the rest of the world forgot they existed. The dog stopped shaking after 30 minutes. Its breathing slowed and deepened. It was asleep. Elmer stayed on the floor beside it, his hand resting on its side, feeling the rise and fall of its ribs, the warmth slowly returning to its body like a question being answered. The fire popped and hissed. The wind screamed outside. And for the first time since the power went out, Elmer did not feel completely alone. He felt something he had not felt in 14 years. He felt needed. Something depended on him. Something was counting on him to survive. He named the dog the next morning. He did not think about it, did not deliberate. The name came to him the way names sometimes do, fully formed and certain. Biscuit, because the dog was small and brown and warm, and because Loretta used to make biscuits every Saturday morning, and the smell of them baking was the closest thing to happiness Elmer had ever known. He heated the last can of tomato soup on the wood stove, half for him, half for Biscuit. The dog ate slowly at first, suspiciously, as if it could not believe this was real. Then with increasing enthusiasm, licking the saucer clean and looking up at Elmer for more. He gave it a handful of saltine crackers, which it ate one by one, delicately, as if it were being polite, as if it understood that food was precious now, as if it understood that they were in this together. The second day brought a new crisis. Water. The gallon jug was half empty already. The dry cold pulled moisture from his body faster than he expected. His lips were cracked and bleeding. His throat felt raw. Biscuit needed water too, and the dog drank more than he had anticipated, lapping at the bowl with a desperation that told Elmer the animal had been without water for a long time before it found his door. He scraped snow from the porch railing, working as fast as he could in the killing cold, and melted it on the stove. A full bowl of snow produced about 1 cup of water. Snow is mostly air. He would need to make many trips to the door to collect enough for both of them, 8 trips by evening. Half a gallon of snow melt stored in empty soup cans. Not enough, but something. Not enough, but they were still alive. That night, he did something he had not done in years. He prayed, not formally, not with memorized words or practiced gestures. He prayed the way Loretta used to, talking to God the way she talked to a neighbor over the fence, casual and honest and without pretense. He thanked whoever was listening for the fire that still burned, and the wood that remained, and the dog that had found its way to his door. He asked for one more day, just one more, and then he would ask again. By the 4th day, Elmer's body had begun to betray him. The cold had settled into his joints like concrete poured into the spaces between his bones. Each morning it took longer to stand, longer to move, longer to coax his fingers into gripping the logs he needed to feed the fire. His right knee, the one he had injured in the mines 50 years ago, had swollen to twice its normal size. His hands shook when he held his mug. His cough, a dry, persistent thing that had started on the second day, had deepened into something that rattled in his chest like loose stones in a tin can. The food was almost gone. 1 can of pinto beans remained. A few crackers. The peanut butter, nearly empty. He rationed carefully, eating 1 small meal a day and giving Biscuit whatever he could spare. The dog had become his shadow, following him from room to room, sleeping pressed against his legs, sharing warmth and company. It had gained a little weight despite the meager rations. Its eyes had brightened. Sometimes in the glow of the firelight, it would wag its tail when it looked at him. A small gesture, but it meant everything. The wood was running low. He had burned through his indoor supply faster than planned. The pile outside was locked under a thick layer of ice and snow. Getting to it would require going outside in temperatures that could freeze exposed skin in under a minute. The risk was enormous. A fall on the ice. A twisted ankle. A moment of confusion in the blinding white. Any of those could kill him as surely as a bullet. On the morning of the 4th day, he made a decision. He needed wood. Without it, the fire would die. Without the fire, he and Biscuit would die. It was simple mathematics. Subtraction. The slow removal of everything that kept a body alive. He had to go outside. There was no other choice. He dressed in every piece of clothing he owned. 2 shirts, a flannel, a sweater, the Carhartt jacket, 2 pairs of pants, one over the other, 3 pairs of socks, the gloves, the scarf, the hat. He wrapped a towel around his face, leaving only his eyes exposed. He looked at himself in the small mirror by the back door and did not recognize the figure looking back. The eyes were his, sharp and blue and alive. The rest was a shapeless mass of fabric, more laundry pile than man. He told Biscuit to stay. The dog looked at him with an expression that was unmistakably worried, its brow furrowed, its ears pressed back against its head. It whined once, a small questioning sound. Elmer patted its head and opened the door. The cold was beyond description. It was not a temperature. It was an assault. It hit him with a force that made his vision blur and his thoughts scatter like startled birds. For a moment, he could not remember why he was outside. Then his hand found the wall of the house, and he steadied himself and moved forward. The woodpile was 20 steps away. He counted them. 1, 2, 3. Each step deliberate, planted firmly on the frozen ground, testing the surface before committing his weight. The ice was treacherous, layered and uneven, and beneath it the ground was hard as stone. 4, 5, 6. His lungs burned with each breath. The air felt like inhaling glass, sharp and cutting. 7, 8, 9. His eyes watered and the tears froze immediately, sealing his lashes together. He had to stop and rub them with his gloved hand just to see where he was going. He reached the woodpile and began pulling logs free from the ice. They were frozen together, welded by layers of ice that had formed and reformed over the past 4 days. He pulled and twisted and pried, and each log that came free cost him something. Energy, warmth, time, precious seconds of exposure to the killing cold. He stacked 4 logs in his arms and turned back toward the house. He made it 7 steps before his knee gave out. The right one, the bad one, the one that had been warning him for days. It buckled without ceremony, folding inward like a broken hinge, and he went down hard on his left side. The logs scattered across the ice. The impact drove the air from his lungs. For a moment he lay there, stunned and gasping, staring up at the gray sky which was the same unchanging gray it had been for days. He felt the cold begin to seep into him, through the ice, through his clothes, through his skin, moving inward toward his core with a patience that was almost thoughtful, almost gentle. This is how it happens, he thought. not with drama or spectacle, with stillness. A man lying on the ice behind his own house, 93 years old, too tired and too cold and too alone to get up. The cold would do the rest. It would lower his body temperature degree by degree. His thoughts would blur. His limbs would stop responding. He would feel warm, paradoxically, beautifully warm. And then he would sleep. And then he would not wake up. It would be, in its way, a gentle death, the mountain taking back one of its own. He thought about Loretta. Not sentimentally, not with tears or longing, with the clear, practical focus of a man solving a problem. Loretta would not have let him lie here. Loretta would have opened that door and shouted his name in that voice she used when she meant business. The voice that could have commanded armies. He could almost hear her now, across the years, across the silence that had separated them since she died. Elmer Boggs, you get up off that ground right now, do you hear me? Get up. Get up right now. He got up. Not quickly, not gracefully, but he got up. He pulled himself to his knees first, using his hands to push against the ice, ignoring the pain that shot through his wrists. Then to his feet, one leg at a time, leaning against the woodpile for support. His knee screamed, his back howled, every part of him protested. But he was standing. He was still alive. He picked up 2 of the 4 logs, left the other 2 where they had fallen. He could not carry 4. His body would not allow it. 2 would have to be enough. 2 would have to keep them alive until he could come back for more. He walked back to the house, slowly, carefully, each step a small victory against the cold and the ice and the stubborn resistance of his own aging body. If this story is making you feel something right now, take a second and leave a comment saying, "Some people don't give up because they're brave. They don't give up because it's the only thing they know how to do." I want to read every single one of your comments. They matter more than you know. Inside, Biscuit was at the door, tail wagging furiously, whining and jumping. The dog had been watching through the window. The dog had seen him fall. The dog had been waiting, terrified for him to get back up. Elmer set the logs by the stove and collapsed into his chair. His hands were shaking so badly he could not unzip his jacket. He sat there trembling for 10 minutes, Biscuit pressed against his legs, before the warmth of the room penetrated his frozen clothing enough for him to move again. He did not go back outside that day. He could not. His body had given everything it had. But the 2 logs burned through the night, and Biscuit slept curled against his chest, and when morning came they were both still breathing. That was enough. That was victory. The cold held for 9 days. 9 days without power. 9 days without heat beyond what the wood stove could produce. 9 days without running water. 9 days without contact with any other human being. 9 days of survival, hour by hour, log by log, prayer by prayer. Elmer made 2 more trips to the woodpile over those 9 days. Each one was a battle. Each one nearly killed him. But he dragged himself out there and he dragged the wood back and he kept the fire burning because that was what survival required. That was what Loretta would have expected. That was what the mountain demanded. On the 5th day, the pipes in the bathroom burst. He heard it at dawn, a sharp crack followed by the sound of water running inside the walls, and then silence as the water froze again almost immediately. He sealed the bathroom door with rags and towels and added it to the list of things he would deal with when the cold broke. Keeping the list gave him something to plan for. Planning for the future meant he believed there would be one. On the 6th day, the cough worsened. It came in fits that doubled him over in his chair, his body convulsing, his ribs aching, his eyes watering. Biscuit would press against his legs during these episodes, looking up at him with an expression of open concern. "I am all right," he would say, his voice raw and thin. "I am all right, Biscuit. It is just a cough." The dog did not look convinced, but it stayed close, and its warmth against his legs was a comfort that no medicine could have matched. On the 7th day, the wind finally dropped. Not gradually, not in stages, all at once, as if someone had closed a door. The silence that followed was so complete that Elmer went to the window to make sure the world was still there. It was. The mountains stood exactly where they had always stood, white and immense and indifferent, their ridgelines sharp against a sky that had begun, for the first time in a week, to show patches of blue. On the 8th day, the temperature climbed to -30. It felt warm. Elmer actually laughed at this, standing on the porch in his coat and hat, the air still burning his lungs, but with less intensity than before. He laughed because -30 degrees felt warm, and that was either the funniest thing in the world or the saddest, and he was too tired to know which, so he chose funny. Biscuit stood beside him, tail wagging, nose lifted to the air, sniffing with focused intensity. The dog could smell it too. The world was changing. The siege was ending. On the 9th day, the power came back. The refrigerator hummed to life. The light over the kitchen sink flickered on. The digital clock on the microwave began flashing 12 o'clock, as if no time had passed, as if the past 9 days had been a pause between one moment and the next.
Don't you dare lie.
Elmer stood in the kitchen and listened to the hum of electricity, that ordinary sound that most people never even noticed, and he felt a gratitude so deep and specific that it brought tears to his eyes. Not for the power itself, but for what it represented. Connection. The invisible web of wires and workers and systems that linked his house on this mountain to the rest of the world. He had survived without it. He could survive without it again. But he was grateful he did not have to. The phone started working an hour later. He did not call anyone. There was no one to call. But he picked up the receiver and listened to the dial tone and felt something loosen in his chest. The world remembered he existed. The world had not forgotten him entirely. The days that followed the thaw were quiet. He moved slowly through the house, assessing the damage. The burst pipes in the bathroom, a cracked window in the bedroom, the 2 logs still lying on the ice behind the house where they had fallen when his knee gave out. He added them to the list. He would fix everything when spring came. He would rebuild what needed rebuilding. He had done it before. He would do it again. Biscuit followed him everywhere. The dog had filled out noticeably over the 9 days, despite the meager rations. Its ribs no longer showed. Its coat had developed a faint sheen of health. It moved with a confidence it had not possessed that first night when it scratched at his door, trembling and half frozen, asking to be let in, asking to be saved, asking to be part of something. One night, about 2 weeks after the power returned, Elmer sat in his chair by the wood stove with Biscuit on his lap. The fire crackled. The house was warm. Outside, the temperature had climbed above 0 for the first time in weeks. He could hear water dripping from the eaves as the ice began to melt. Spring was coming. The world was thawing. The siege was truly over. He thought about the 9 days. He thought about the cold and the silence and the long dark nights when he had wondered if morning would ever come. He thought about lying on the ice with his knee screaming and his lungs burning and the gray sky pressing down on him like a weight. He thought about Loretta's voice, clear as a bell across 14 years of silence, telling him to get up. He looked down at Biscuit. The dog looked back at him with brown eyes that held nothing but trust and contentment. "We made it," Elmer said quietly. "We made it, Biscuit." The dog wagged its tail once, as if it understood perfectly. Spring came slowly at first, then all at once. The snow retreated up the ridgelines like a tide going out. The creek behind the house thawed and began to run again, the water clear and cold and musical over the rocks. Birds returned, cardinals first, then robins, then crows landing on the porch railing to stare at Biscuit through the window with what looked like indignation. Wildflowers appeared on the slopes, trillium and bloodroot and jack-in-the-pulpit, their colors startling after months of white and gray and the endless brown of dead leaves. Elmer sat on the porch in the late afternoon sun, Biscuit lying at his feet, and he felt the warmth on his face and on his hands, and he closed his eyes and breathed. The air smelled of earth and rain and the green living scent of things growing. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever experienced. More beautiful because of the cold that had come before it, more precious because he had earned it, breath by breath, log by log, prayer by prayer, through 9 days that tried to take everything and failed. He thought about Loretta. He thought about how she would have loved this moment. The sun on the porch, the dog at his feet, the mountains greening with new life. She would have made lemonade, and they would have sat here together, and she would have told him again that he was the most stubborn man she had ever known. And he would have smiled and said nothing because she was right, and they both knew it, and that was all right. "We made it," he said again, to no one in particular, to Loretta, to Biscuit, to the mountains and the sky and the spring that had finally arrived. "We made it." Biscuit lifted its head and looked at him. Then it put its head back down on its paws and closed its eyes, perfectly content, perfectly at peace, perfectly home. If you watched all the way to this point, it is because this story touched something real inside you. Leave a comment right now saying, "I watched until the end, so I can see you, so I can know who really connects with these stories." Every comment means the world to this channel. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone you love or something you have survived, hit that like button. One tap. That is all it takes to tell the algorithm that real human stories deserve to be seen. And share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. A parent, a grandparent, a friend going through something hard. Let them know that survival is not just possible. It is what we were built for. And if you have not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? This channel brings you the most powerful true stories of human resilience, courage, and heart. Hit subscribe, turn on the bell, and join this community. Because the next story might be the one that changes your life. The camera holds on the mountains. The light softens. The wind moves through the trees, gentle now, carrying the last of winter far away to some place where it cannot hurt anyone. And somewhere on a ridge in Harlan County, Kentucky, a 93-year-old man sits on his porch with a dog at his feet and the spring sun on his face, watching the world come back to life, knowing that he is part of it, that he has always been part of it, and that no cold, no matter how deep, no matter how long, no matter how dark, can ever change that.